Doing what?
Armored because then I could see better.
Oh.
You have to dim the light.
I don't know. Even once you give me that one, this one hasn't been used. Once you give me that
Grandma
one.
said so.
Huh?
That's all right. They're both
Usable.
emergency candles.
Oh,
They're
bring
not
down the
I'll
emergency
blow
camp.
this one out.
Choose the light.
It's not even lighting.
Don't light. Don't have to blow it out. Okay, anyhow, there's a guy that has a speech impediment, you know. He's in bad
I
shape.
remember now.
So he has this old building that he renovates and makes little apartment houses out of it, you know, made old 6 or 8 of them, I guess. And he gets it all painted and fixed up nice, and he's got a little office there, and he's sitting there in the chair and in his office, and the bell rings, you know. So he opens the door and he says, hello, he says, can I help you? And the guy looks at him, he says, yeah, he says, you can help me. And he says, fine. He says, I see you got rooms for rent. And he says, can I look at one? And the guy says, yeah, come on in. So he goes in and he says, oh, you got a stove and a refrigerator. The guy says, how much are you asking?
This is why it's trying to
And he says, $20 a week. And the guy says, oh, good. He says, I'll take it. So he goes in his room and starts thinking. He says, hey, just a minute, mister. He says, would you come back in here? He says, you know, I've been walking all over trying to find a place to stay. And he says, I finally found a place, but he says, you know, I'm awful tired. He says, would you mind blowing this candle out? And the guy says, oh, yeah, no problem. He goes, he says, oh, I'm sorry, I can't blow it out. And the guy says, well, okay, that's okay. So he goes on his way. Guy comes back to the office, and he says, he sits there and he's listening to the radio, and the doorbell rings again. So the guy comes to the door, he opens it up, and he says, yes, can I help you? And the guy says, yeah, you can help me. And he looks, and he's like, yes. He says, I see you got rooms for rent. And the guy says, yeah, I got rooms for rent. Would you like to see mine? So they go in the back, and he says, I got a stove and a bin and a refrigerator. And he says, how much you asking? He says, $20 a week. So anyhow, they're going along, and this guy and the first guy hears this talking, you know. So he comes out and he says, say, mister, maybe you can help me. And the guy says, sure, what's your problem? And he says, well, would you come in my room? And he says, and help me. He says, I've been walking all over. He says, I'm real tired. He says, I want to take a nap. And he says, I can't take a nap with this candle on. He says, would you mind putting it out? And the guy says, yeah, no problem. And he goes, he says, I'm sorry. He says, I can't put it out. So that went there. So everything's quiet for a while, and the manager's back in his office, and he's sitting there, and the bell rings again. So he goes to the door, and he says, yes, can I help you? And the guy says, yeah. He says, you can help me. He says, I want a room. He says, can I look at one of your rooms? And the guy says, yeah, sure, come on in. So he shows him, he says, oh, you got a stove, a refrigerator, and bed. He says, how much you asking? He says, $20 a week. And the guy says, hey, I'll take it. So this guy hears these voices again. He comes back out, and he says, say, mister, he says, maybe you can help me. He says, would you come in my room? And the guy says, sure. He says, what can I do for you? And he says, you know, he says, give him a big spiel. He's tired. He wants to take a nap. And he says, he can't get the candle on. And he says, oh, yeah. He says, no problem. He goes, he says, no, I'm sorry. He says, I can't put it out. And oh, God. He says, okay, thank you. Anyway, and he goes, you know, so when the guy goes back in his office, and he's sitting there, and the bell rings again. The guy comes to the door, and he says, yes. He says, can I help you? And the guy says, yes. He says, you can help me. He says, I see you have rooms for rent. He says, yeah. He says, yeah. He says, would you like to look at one? The guy says, yes, I would. So they go in, and he says, I got a fridge, refrigerator, stove, and a bed. And he says, how much you asking? And he says, $20 a week. And he says, hey, he says, fine. He says, I'll take it, you know. And the guy hears this noise again, talking. He comes out, and he's, oh, I'm sorry to bother you. He says, Mister, he says, maybe you can help me. He says, I've been tired. I've been walking all over town. He says, I'm going nuts here. He says, I want to take a nap, but I can't go take a nap with this candle on. He says, could you blow it out? And the guy, sure, no problem. You missed the whole thing.
No, I saw
He
it.
didn't see
Did he?
that.
Can you see me? Oh, I didn't think you could.
Around there somewhere.